But this was my favorite one, actually in North Carolina here. This was a school in North Carolina Central, in Durham, North Carolina. As you know, an all African-American school and really an all African-American law school. But they had this scholarship for minorities. And I thought I'd apply as a white guy, I might get in, but I got rejected there as well. We laugh now, but just think as a 24-year-old, 25-year-old kid, your whole life thinking that you want to go to law school. And you apply to 37 of the easiest schools to get into and rejected at every single one of them. I was lost. My whole life, when you're dyslexic, you can't read, your whole life people tell you what you can't do. You can't go to college. You can't go to law school. You can't do things. You can't write a New York Times best-selling book. You can't do this. And I just turn all that can't into what I can do. And I just try to overcome all those obstacles that I'm gonna do it. And I remember being totally lost after those applications and just praying to God about what's my path, what am I supposed to do? And I was living in Japan and decided to take a month off, and I went to Bali, Indonesia, and do some scuba diving. And I'm a huge scuba diver, and I was in Indonesia scuba diving, and I met this woman that was very involved in an organization called Rotary. Rotary International. There's probably some Rotarians here in the room. Any Rotarians? A bunch of you. Wow, great. Well, as you know, the Rotary has this scholarship called the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. Never heard of this scholarship before, but as my friend that was scuba diving with in Indonesia was telling me that her sister was a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholar, that they try to find young men and young women around the world to represent Rotary and travel around the world as an ambassador of Rotary. And in return, they give you a $50,000 full scholarship to go to business school anywhere in the world. And she was telling me about the prestige of the scholarship, that if you're chosen, because they only choose one, that you have an automatic acceptance to really any business school in the world. In the back of my head, I'm like, automatic acceptance. They don't have to see my transcript. If I get a Rotary scholarship, I can go to business school. That's my new plan. So I went back to Colorado, or Japan. This is right before the internet was cracking. So I wrote a letter to the president of Rotary International in Evanston, outside Chicago, and got this 8-page application. I can barely read the thing, so I had to get a friend of mine that could read English to read the application to me. And I just spent the whole weekend pouring my heart out on this application. Talked about my travels with Up With People and how that just changed my life. Talked about my mom and dad having 2 miscarriages when I was young and decided to adopt a little girl from Korea when she was only 8 months old, and what that was like growing up in New York with a little sister that looked different than me. I talked about my roommate at East Carolina University that Joey knows and Scott knows and Jim Westmoreland knows, but he was a fraternity brother of mine, decided to drink too much one night and went to dive off the university lake that was kind of forbidden, and he dove off in about 3 or 4 feet of shallow water, became a quadriplegic, and I got to live with him for about 4.5 of those 6 years at East Carolina, and what that did for me, and how we backpacked out throughout Europe in 1992 when we graduated college, and what that was like to backpack all throughout Europe with a quadriplegic, how that changed my life. I just poured my heart out in this applications about who I am and how I want to change the world. I talked about my dyslexia and what that helped me overcome a lot of obstacles, and I just thought I did my best on this application. At the last question of the application I finally got to, it said, GPA. What's your GPA? I was like, oh, darn it. And then in small parentheses after that, it said 4.0 required. And my heart just sunk because I told you my GPA in high school and I told you my GPA at East Carolina. So being the entrepreneur that I am, I wrote 4.0. And then I put a little asterisk next to it and I said, in small handwriting on the opposite page, Dear Sir or Madam, if you took my high school GPA and you added it to my college GPA, I had a 4.0. And I submitted the application. I didn't think I was going to get it, but I spent like a whole damn weekend writing the application out. I was going to at least mail it, you know? So I mailed the application, and lo and behold, about a month later, I didn't get another rejection letter. Out of 800 applications from the top college graduates in the country, the Rotary International Ambassadorial Committee chose 10 final candidates to fly to New York to interview for this $50,000 scholarship. I remember calling my dad up, who's pretty much my biggest champion, my biggest hero. And I said, Dad, there's no way I'm going to get this scholarship. First of all, once they find out I didn't get it to 4.0, they're not going to appreciate my 2 + 2 is humor. 2 + 2 is 4 is humor. And I don't really have any money to buy a plane ticket to go to New York because I spent all these money on my damn law school applications. So I'm stuck. So my dad lent me the money, bought a plane ticket, went to New York. I'm jet lagged. I'm nervous. I'm exhausted. I flying from Tokyo to New York. I rent a car. I'm driving upstate New York. The interview was in Peekskill, New York, this little Italian restaurant off I-87. Maybe some of you know where Peekskill is. I go in this little Italian restaurant, and these 10 very distinguished Rotarians were there, shaking hands with the 10 final candidates. And these guys had name badges, these candidates from Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and I had East Carolina University. And everyone was like, where the hell is that? And never heard of that school before, but I'm proud to be an East Carolina grad. And I started trying to talk to some of these other candidates, and they were cold. They were there to win. They wanted that scholarship. So the chairman of the Rotary Committee met us all at this little table and asked us to stay in the bar area of this restaurant. And they were going to pull us one by one into the banquet room where the 10 Rotarians were behind a desk, and the interview was for about a half an hour long. And I did the math. My last name is Spaulding, so I had about a 3.5-hour wait in this bar area. And I was nervous. And these other candidates weren't talking to me. They were all on the different sides of the bar studying their notes. So, you being an East Carolina grad, if you're at a bar for 3.5 hours, what do? You go to the bar and have a drink, right? A Diet Coke. So I go up to the bar and I order a Diet Coke and I start talking to the bartender because there's no one at the bar. It was the middle of the day. So I'm talking to the bartender, and it turns out this bartender was a 4th-generation owner of this establishment. He had so much passion and pride being come from Italy. And this little 4 or 5 or 6-year-old kid was running behind the bar, the 5th-generation owner. It's just an amazing story about how they brought this restaurant over from Italy to Peekskill. And before you know it, this guy had yearbooks out and photo albums out. When we did the extension in 19 whatever at the back of the house, he showed me all around and introduced me to his staff. I mean, he just poured his heart out to me. And all I asked him was, tell me about your place. But he did me the biggest favor, because I was so nervous. He killed 3 hours of just biting my nails off. Finally, my name got called. I went into the interview, and I just shared my heart with this Rotary Committee about why I want to change the world. And I'm not the smartest kid in the world, and I can't read, but I love people, and I want to travel the world, and I want to represent Rotary as an ambassador, and I want to get an MBA and help change the world. Well, half the committee definitely saw the passion in my heart, but the other half of the committee definitely were more academics and were drilling me on the rigors of business school and so forth. We'll make a long story short. The Rotary Committee made a vote that day. And the 10 final candidates, they narrowed it down to 2 people. This girl from Harvard University that graduated magna cum laude. And her dream was to go to business school in the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And after she graduated and got her degree in South Africa, she wanted to raise venture capital funds to open up AIDS clinics throughout South Africa. I mean, how do you beat that? And the other half of the committee really saw the heart and the passion of Tommy Spaulding. He's not the smartest kid in the world, but there's something special about him. So they fought back and forth, 5 and 5. And I heard this story a couple years after. It's actually chapter 2 in my book. That the chairman of the board said, we only have one scholarship. There's only one $50,000 Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. We have a dead tie, 5 for Spaulding, 5 for Harvard, 5 for Spaulding, 5 for Harvard. They're back and forth, fighting and fighting and fighting. They've been in this room for 8 hours. No one was changing their vote. The chairman was getting very frustrated and saying, let's take a break. We've been in this room for almost the full day. Let's go to the bar and get a drink and we'll talk about it. So these 10 Rotarians got up, walked over to the bar, and sat around the bar where I spent most of my morning. And bartender pours them all a drink. And before you know it, they start talking about that conversation. Who should win this award? Spaulding, Harvard, Spaulding, Harvard. It's like a Miller Lite commercial. Tastes great, less filling, Spaulding, Harvard, Spaulding. Fighting over this, this award. And finally, the chairperson said, okay, one last vote. Who's for Spaulding? 5 people raised their hand. Who's for Harvard? 5 people raised their hand. Dead tie. And the chairman looked around and said, hey, Mr. Bartender, you were in the room the entire day. You must have met all 10 of those candidates. Who do you think should win the $50,000 Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship? And the bartender peeped up and said, I didn't meet any of the other 9 candidates. That Tommy Spaulding came up to the bar, talked to me for 3 hours. What a genuine, nice kid. The bartender was the deciding vote, and I won the $50,000 scholarship. Thanks. Just a month before, I got literally 37 rejection letters of the worst law schools in North America. And because a bartender from upstate New York, who I just met, was the deciding vote that really changed my life because I did go to business school. And by then, they discovered my dyslexia. And I was able to take tests, auditory, and was able to graduate nearly top of my class and get recruited by IBM. And at 29 years old, became one of their top salespeople in the country because a bartender was a deciding vote. And you're probably wondering, what the hell did I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go hear this guy talk about some bartender story? It has everything to do with my message about relationships. Is you have no idea who in your personal or your professional life that you're going to meet that could be incredibly influential in your life. If you just open your heart to the spirit that every single person in this room, on this planet, has a gift of a relationship. But we Americans, we qualify people. I got to sit at a table where there's influential people. I got to work the room and find the decision makers and so forth. Do you think I went in that bar area and say, I got to hang out with that bartender for 3 hours because he was going to be a deciding vote? No, I was taught long ago to have the spirit just to genuinely love people. And if you can have that spirit in your company, in your organization, in your family, in your heart, you'll become incredibly successful. That's what my book's about. When I was a kid, I couldn't read. My dad knew that. He knew I wasn't a great sports guy like my cousin Joe Welsh. He knew I wasn't very good looking like my cousin Joe Welsh. He knew I wasn't academically gifted, not like my cousin Joe Welsh. But he knew I had a gift. At a very young age, he knew that I was really good with people. So he bought a book for me. My mom was a Christian, and she brought the Bible to me and read the Bible to me. My dad was a Catholic, so he didn't read the Bible. He read a book called How to Win Friends from Influenced People by Dale Carnegie. No offense to Catholics. I grew up Catholic. It's just a joke. And my dad read this book to me over and over to me. He said, Tommy, Dale Carnegie just wrote this masterpiece. Who's read this book? Most of you. Over 20 million copies. Only 2 or 3 books ever in the world that sold more copies than this book. He read this book to me over and over 100 times. And I've read this book over and over. They have it on tape now. And this book really talks about if you look people in the eye and you shake people's hands and you speak about their interests and you kind of avoid conflict, these tactics, you could win friends and influence people. You'll be popular. You'll be able to really be able to build these relationships in life and be successful. So I literally took this book and downloaded it into DNA who I was. And I want to tell you, in high school, by far the most popular kid at Suffolk High School. The dumbest kid in Suffolk High School, but the most popular. Class president, captain of every sport, voted most popular, most everything. Went to East Carolina. You know, well, I almost didn't get in my fraternity because that guy almost blackballed me, Scott Diggs over there. But fraternity president, student government president, class president, East Carolina. Everywhere I went to, I was a leader. I was just born to meet people. Then I got into IBM, became their top sales guy, number 2 in the country out of 8,000 sales rep, because I can sell anything. I use this book. I can just win friends, influence people, look people in the eyes, shake people's hands. I was good. And then something happened to me about 8 years ago. 2 things happened. One, I got married. And marriage is the most humbling thing in the world because every night you go to bed and you look over your wife and she just gives you beautiful feedback on basically what a jerk you are and all the things you need to work on. So 8 years later, I become a great man, a changed man. And the other thing is I got God in my life and I got right with him. But 8 years ago, my wife gave me this incredible feedback. He said, Tommy, you're a self-made millionaire. You're successful. You have all these things going on. Now you're running up with people, the organization that changed your life. You're running this worldwide organization. Now we're about to have our first child. We're now married. And you have everything. But you still have this chip on your shoulder. Like you're trying to prove to the whole world that you're not stupid. That's the bad thing about dyslexia is that you got this chip that you're just never enough because you want to prove Mr. Tilton. You want to go tell him to go kiss your ass because he didn't tell you to go to college. You want to tell this person, tell that person, this chip. And at some point you have to say it's enough. God loves you who you are. And you just got to start making a contribution. And you work a room, you go to a room, tell me you meet 500 people. Tell me one of their names, one thing about them. Because I was just such a networker. And she really challenged me, big time. And my life's been transformed over the last 8 years. And the organizations that I've led have been incredibly successful because I changed my whole philosophy.